Sikoli Amani Yousuf ni Yukyats, which in English translates to, "Hello, my name is Amani Yousuf." I thank you all for taking the time to be here. Last year, as an AP research student, a class in which students can conduct a year-long study on any topic of their choosing, I had the privilege to conduct a research study on the impacts on participants of an Oneida Nation, Wisconsin substance and drug abuse recovery talking circle. In fact, it was the most gratifying experience of my life that I was inspired to go on later in my life to earn my PhD. Now, allow me to take you back in time. Long before European colonization, the Oneida, or Oneo Teaka, which means the people of the standing stone, long before European colonization, the Oneida Nation existed as a sovereign nation inhabiting approximately 6 million acres of modern-day New York land. However, sadly, in the 1820s, the white settlers deprived Oneidas of their land and culture, so that forced them to move to Wisconsin from New York to create a new government. The encroachment that led the Oneida to move to Wisconsin is an example of the phenomenon known as historical trauma, or HT for short. Throughout history, the mass extermination efforts endured by Native Americans, for example, genocide, forced relocation, and the abduction of children to government boarding schools, is an example of historical trauma, which is the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding occurring across generations. So I don't know if you guys know this, but Indigenous culture is known for its many healing methods, for instance, the talking circle. Originating in the Lakota tribe, talking circles have facilitators who lead a prayer to establish spirituality and moderate a discussion where everyone comes together to discuss their problems. Talking circles also may not be, they're also used for alcohol abuse recovery because Indigenous spirituality does not always align with Alcoholics Anonymous beliefs. I'm now going to explain how I ended up studying this specific Oneida talking circle. I started out wanting to study something related to Native Americans. I was fascinated by the boarding schools, which are leading examples of historical trauma because they're also devastating. However, given my resources as a high school student, I soon realized that studying the boarding schools wasn't realistic. So I continued down the historical trauma path until I narrowed my research down to talking circles. Since Illinois doesn't have any federally recognized tribes, I began researching the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. After months of trial and error, based off of population, specifically tribal identity, and type of enrolled tribal member, I finally established the gap when I discovered that an Oneida Nation of Wisconsin substance and drug abuse recovery talking circle existed. So now, my research question was, what are the potential impacts on participants of an Oneida Nation of Wisconsin talking circle focused on substance and drug abuse recovery? I came to my conclusion with this question because I realized that my study could be central to determining the next steps for the Oneida, and by asking this question, I could evaluate what the potential impacts were that are unknown. I hypothesized that this Oneida substance and drug abuse recovery talking circle would positively impact its participants by helping them heal from trauma, whether it be historical trauma or traditional trauma, helping them become sober, helping them form different connections. The first theme was connection with others and connection to their ancestors. And the final theme was that it would help them work through other life challenges because life, no matter what you've been through, is not easy. My hypothesis turned out to be correct, and my findings were almost identical to what I hypothesized. So what I just explained is basically the same thing. So the four themes, the first theme was participants were positively impacted by being able to talk through traumatic events they or other people in their lives have experienced. And it can be broken down into sub-themes. The first one is historical trauma, and the second one is traditional trauma, or the long-term consequences of enduring a distressing event. For example, the death of a loved one, or a relative, sexual assault, and violence. The second one was that it stimulates connection, and this was also a sub-theme because during my responses, I interviewed my participants. They talked so much about two things that I had to divide the two. The first one is connection with others, and the second one was connection to their ancestors, and Oneidas were reminded of their cultural roots as a native. The third one was talking circles' influence on sobriety, because as a result of attending the circle, everyone was working to actively combat their substance and drug abuse issues because they were parents, they were grandparents, or they just wanted to better themselves. And the final one was the influence on all other areas of life. I had one participant who, her daughter said that she would never speak to her again if she didn't work on her life, so she was really inspired, and she came to the talking circle. And now they're back together, so it's a really beautiful thing. In answering my research question and addressing the gap, it is clear that this Oneida Talking Circle positively impacted its participants by helping them work through the 4 themes below. And additionally, my findings also catalyze areas of future research. Studying a new population, specifically a non-federally recognized tribe, could raise awareness about the lack of resources within those communities and document more talking circle narratives. My research consisted of a method that was qualitative semi-structured interviews, but implementing community-based participatory research, it's a bit of a tongue twister, a method in which researchers and community members engage equally to create social change throughout the process, could be the effective intervention method to combat the insensitive nature of studies on Natives, as working together and researching Indigenous population while working with them would eliminate any consequences of Western research lunch perspectives, because honoring the Indigenous culture is extremely important for ethicality and for just being a good person. Finally, as someone who firmly believes in the benefits of therapy, I cannot even begin to explain how much beautiful this experience was to me, and obviously I do firmly believe in therapy, which is probably coming from a Western-centric perspective, but I want to emphasize how meaningful and special this experience was for the participants. Unfortunately, a few weeks after conducting my study, the Talking Circle shut down after 6 years due to a lack of volunteers and the facilitator retiring. However, my study should prompt the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin to acquire more volunteers and replace the facilitator. But what is so special about this is that rather than it being just a individual therapy session, by being in a talking circle, not only does the circle symbolize togetherness, but it also symbolizes a sense of community healing, and which is something that you can't get in other places. By participants sharing their struggles with each other, everyone was lifted up rather than just each individual. So much so that even after the circle shut down, everyone remained close. They actually have frequent get-togethers, which just goes to show how everyone cares about each other. So while I've never struggled with any form of addiction, I'm grateful to have been part of this experience because I became a better listener, and I learned, through exposure to the circle, I've gained insight on how to restore balance and peace in my life. Yo, Unko, or thank you.